When my wife and I found out she was pregnant with twins, I knew life was about to change in ways I could barely imagine. I was filled with joy at the idea of becoming a father, but also with a deep sense of dread. We were living paycheck to paycheck, barely making ends meet, and with 2 babies on the way, the pressure of providing weighed heavily on me. After many long, sleepless nights thinking about how we were going to survive, I made the difficult decision to work in a different country where I could earn more money. It was the only way I could give my children the life they deserved, or so I thought. The day I left, my wife tried to stay strong for me. I told her I was doing this for us, for our family. We hugged for what felt like hours, neither of us wanting to let go, but eventually, I had to walk out the door. My heart broke as I heard her whisper, "Come back soon." The next 2 years were grueling. I missed the birth of my daughters, their first smiles, their first steps. The only connection I had to them was through the photos and videos my wife would send. But the loneliness grew, and though I was sending money home, I started to question whether I was doing the right thing. What was the point of being a father if I wasn't there for my family? I had sacrificed so much, and it never felt like enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day came for me to return home. My flight landed late at night, and as I drove through the familiar streets, a wave of anticipation and fear washed over me. I was going back to a different life, a different version of the family I had left behind. We had moved to a new state where I didn't know anyone. I had no friends or family nearby for support, just my wife and our kids. When I opened the front door, the reality of fatherhood hit me like a ton of bricks. My daughters, whom I had only known through pictures and videos, were strangers to me. They were full of energy and demanded my attention, but I didn't know how to connect with them. I wasn't ready for this life I had been dreaming about for years. My wife had changed too. She was distant, and I could sense the tension between us. She had been holding the family together while I was gone, and now it seemed like there was a rift between us. That night, after we put the girls to bed, my wife and I sat down to talk. We discussed our future, but deep down, I had already made up my mind. I couldn't do this. I wasn't cut out to be the father or the husband my family needed. I had some money saved, and I thought leaving it all to them was the only way to make sure they would be okay without me. They didn't need me. They needed stability, and I was anything but stable. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, trying to gather the courage to leave. I told my wife I had to run to the store, doing my best to keep it together. But as I was about to walk out, my daughter ran up to me with her big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, bring me home a surprise," she said with a smile that could melt anyone's heart. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the reality of what I was about to do set in. I was about to walk away from my family, my daughters, who barely knew me, but still looked at me like I was their hero. I barely made it out of the driveway before I broke down. I drove to a busy street, parked my car, and sobbed uncontrollably. The weight of my decision crushed me. I thought about what kind of father I would be if I left. Could I really live with myself knowing I had abandoned my family when they needed me most? After what felt like hours, I finally made a decision. I turned the car around and drove back to my house. I stopped by the store to pick up toys for my girls and a ring for my wife. When I walked through the door, my wife looked at me, confused by the gifts, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That night, I tucked my daughters into bed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was home. From that day forward, I committed myself to my family. I started spending more time with my daughters, learning who they were and what made them laugh. I worked on my marriage, trying to rebuild the connection I had lost with my wife. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like running again, days when the responsibility seemed too much. But every time I looked at my daughters' faces or held my wife's hand, I reminded myself why I stayed. Years later, I couldn't be happier with my family. My daughters have grown into beautiful, bright young girls, and my wife and I have built a stronger relationship than I ever thought possible. Looking back, leaving them would have been the biggest mistake of my life. I realized that the life I had been afraid of was the one I had always wanted. The struggle, the sacrifice. It was all worth it. Because in the end, I didn't just save my family, I saved myself too.